When like solvers first came along, I was very excited by them. I was like, ooh, this is cool. And it's like a new way of like sort of looking under the veil of how poker works. For me personally, after a while, it started to take the magic away. It turned it more into a game of rote memorization. You know, I loved it when the game was both math and street smarts, and it felt like it was like, no, now there's like a right answer. And if you don't if you don't memorize those right answers and you don't follow it properly, then you're not doing the game right. And there was almost like this judgment, and I felt it myself. I was like judging. I remember I got into like quite a discussion with Phil Hellmuth about this. We even like co-wrote a chapter where he was like arguing for the old school, like sort of short stack plays, and I was like, no, the math is very clear. Now I look back on it and I'm like, you know what, Phil, you were right.
The interview by PokerOrg.
Hi, we're here with the interview for PokerOrg with Liv Boeree. And now recently, Liv went deep in the Bahamas super main event and made $2.8 million. She's also been in the poker world for a long time. In 2005, she was introduced to poker when she met Phil Hellmuth and Annie Duke doing the Ultimate Poker Showdown in the UK. She had just graduated from England's University of Manchester at that time and fell in love with poker. And then she went on to go deep in a number of EPT events. And she's also the host of the popular Win-Win podcast. And she has a whole movement she's created behind that. And has some amazing shows on that channel. So we're going to talk to Liv today about everything in between, poker, life, the matrix, everything we can bring up, and some pretty cool posts, and the quantum levels of physics and things, anything you want to share, because her degree, and I have to admit she's probably quite smarter than myself, is in physics and astrophysics. So that's rather fascinating that you fell into poker. So how are you doing, Liv?
Doing pretty great. Yeah, still kind of reeling from last month's score at the World Series. Very, very unexpected. Very nice surprise.
So, Liv, talk to us about recently you went really deep in the main event, Bahamas. Why did you choose Bahamas instead of coming here? Igor came to LA, did he not? Or...
Well, Igor went to Vegas.
That's what I mean.
He's just waiting on like his travel permit thing for his green card.
Right.
I got mine already, so that was that was the only reason he couldn't come to the Bahamas. He would have come otherwise. But yeah, I went because I'd heard about the tournament. Gigi had done that huge guarantee, and I don't know, felt like I felt really good. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go.
Well, where have you been? Our editor, a couple of people in our staff, going, where has she been? So you disappeared for a while. Tell us about what you've been doing before you were playing. You playing any events now and then during the last?
Yeah, I played the main event like a couple of years, and then the WPT Championship in the last couple of years as well. So I played like 3, and I'll play like a side event. So maybe like 3 tournaments per year on average, right. Maybe less, over the last 5 years. But yeah, basically like come like, what was it, like end of 2018, 2019. I was just really burnt out, frankly. I'd fallen out of love with poker. I wasn't enjoying it anymore. I wasn't enjoying like being a sort of team pro. I think PokerStars were probably not enjoying having me on them anymore either. Like, it was very much a sort of mutual thing. In many ways, I'm quite grateful for that ending, because I was like, I don't know, I was just like limping along, going through the motions, and I felt like I should be doing something more and different, and like, something that excited me. Not that there was anything wrong with poker, it just, I'd been doing it for so long, I wasn't enjoying learning, studying anymore, and my game had gotten really stagnant. So, yeah, and so like when I split with Stars, it was like, okay, let's just do a fresh start here, and then like the pandemic came along and everything else, that sort of like kind of made it easier in many ways, because there's nothing running anyway.
Right.
And I think that made it easier for Igor as well, who also basically quit around the same time. And yeah, I've been like simultaneously obviously interested in this whole sort of idea of what are the biggest risks facing civilization, what are the most neglected areas, or while that was where I work with Raising for Effective Giving and so on, it got me interested in that. And then like the more I looked into these like issues, it became apparent that the thing that's like underlying so many of our problems is like a force of misaligned game theory. It's just game theory all the way down. And I was like, weird. Like it's like, turns out maybe poker has been like useful in like training to think about like sort of incentives and competitive dynamics. As really a lot of our problems are a result of like competition gone wrong. Competition can be amazing, obviously, when it's applied in the right ways, and you get like Olympic athletes doing all these crazy, amazing feats, or like competitive forces between companies who are actually building really cool stuff. That can drive progress forward, and it can be great. But if if people are building like less cool stuff, or things that are very like short-term gain but create all these like long-term harms, then competitive forces will drive that stuff even faster. And often, there are these forces of game theory that will, effectively people are stuck in this dilemma of like, I don't want to take this like bad or risky action, but if I don't do it, I know all my competitors are going to do it anyway, so I might as well do it too.
Right.
That's this like driving force, this game theoretic mechanism that's underlying so many of these problems. And so I just became kind of obsessed with this concept. People might have seen I made these like films that tried to like personify this concept as a demon. Called it's not like I came up with a demon. It's this like very old biblical concept of this thing called Moloch, where people would sacrifice. The legend is that this cult, this like war and money and power obsessed cult, would sacrifice the thing they loved the most, which was their children, to this demon in order to get like money and power and like victory. And so it sort of becomes synonymous with this idea of like these bad games that encourage people, and the like sort of psychopathic behaviors that people get to like get a quick win to stay ahead, or to get ahead. Right. So yeah, I made some like YouTube films about this thing, because I was like, this is such an important concept for people to understand, because people are, like people sense that there's a lot wrong, things that need to be fixed with society, but they often think it's just like, oh, it's, it's this particular bad guy, or it's this particular tribe. Some people are definitely worse than others, and some tribes are worse than others, but ultimately it's the mechanism. Right. If you don't fix the mechanism, you're just going to be repeating the same shit. So I became obsessed with that, and that's where the idea of win-win came from. It's like, okay, I've built up this network of really smart thinkers who are thinking about this stuff a lot, much smarter than me. If I can put my platform to having conversations with them about how they, how we can try and solve these different issues, or like, how do we understand competition better? How do we understand what makes people tick? What is the psychology behind psychopathy? All of these various topics. That's really what Win-Win is trying to understand and trying to fix this mechanism. And it's definitely a work in progress. I can't say I've like come remotely close to it. Although one thing that is emerging that does seem to be a like positive, like a tangible direction, is this idea of like adopting a more win-win mindset. Mm-hmm. Seeing, I think it speaks to me because I used to be like so pathologically competitive, especially when I was younger. I would like, it would often like sort of take me over and consume me. Like, I have to be the best. And I think in part, a lot of poker players have that, frankly, like of the very best. You need a little bit of that madness to want to do, be so obsessed with the game. But then it started to make me miserable quite often. And so I wanted to understand, like, for my own journey, like, where is it that competition goes wrong? How do we have a healthier relationship with it? So yeah, that's kind of that's the story of how what I'm doing now has gotten started. And it's kind of just what I'm like mostly consumed with day to day. Just like either researching or thinking about topics, or getting infuriated by whatever latest bad thing happens and trying to use my platform to do something about it.
To do good. I know one of my main goals when I started in poker was to be a positive force in the industry as a journalist. And I was reading that something similar, a couple of things you wrote back in 2000. We did an interview back in 2011. You became a Poker Stars ambassador for Fox Sports, and you said you wanted to be one of the best in the world. You've addressed that a little bit in poker at that time. You were very competitive. And then I read something here on your X. Don't trust anyone whose moral compass revolves around maximizing shareholder value.
Well, whose moral compass solely revolves around.
Solely, okay. Solely.
Yeah, there's an important caveat there, because I think it's an okay thing to care about maximizing shareholder value, because that is partially aligned. But the trouble is, where you get the misalignment is when someone goes purely about that. And a surprising number of people do. They think it's a perfect proxy for like morality. Oh, if people want to buy it, it must be good.
Right.
No, like a lot of people want to buy fentanyl. Does it mean it's like become zombies because of it? Like, does that mean it's good? No. Like, there are certain things that aren't always perfectly aligned. And even if they do start out as aligned, if you become a pure maximalist about one particular narrow metric, that will over time become decoupled from what's actually good for the whole. And so, yeah. And it was, that tweet is also kind of a little bit of a dig at, a lot of people, especially in the sort of, shall we say, the very short-sighted camp of AI development. They're just like, no, like, just progress, like it must go fast, make number go up. And it's like, there are other things, what's good for investors is not always necessarily good for everybody else. Yeah.
What do you think of the initiative? We'll get back to some poker too. I mean, it's not just about poker, about life and poker. And you talked a bit about that, how it all blends together in the multiverse with Jeff Platt and with Igor on your recent podcast. But what do you think about the recent initiative that Trump has, $500 billion to invest in the infrastructure of AI and working with Musk, and then Musk sort of poo-pooed some of the information about that the company's working.
It wasn't with Musk. It was not. It was nothing to do with Musk.
But I know that part doesn't do with Musk. But as far as Musk responding, did you see his response to saying, "Hey, these people don't have enough money to do what you want to do"? Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So I mean, this thing is, it's unclear, to be honest. I don't quite know the mechanisms because it's so new. But it seems like it's a thing that Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, has claimed he has raised through United Arab Emirates investors, and this guy Massa, who's the CEO of SoftBank, which is this huge like investment bank fund thing.
Right.
And yeah, it seems like it's probably a lot of hype. I don't believe that 500 billion number is accurate. I'm sure there's some very large number, but there's a lot of hype going on in AI. That's not to say that AI is going to be the most transformative in like insane technology. And it's a very broad technology as well. And like there's like narrow forms of AI which will do sorts of things, and then there's like this idea of super intelligence, which many people are hell bent on building. And the hype is, some things are underhyped and some things are overhyped. But in terms of like, what do I think of I think it's good that the US is investing in infrastructure for itself. That is definitely a good thing. Do I think that the current like breakneck speed that AI development is going is optimal? Probably not. No, because as it is, like there's just so many like dystopian traps we can fall into, whether it's like 1984 style surveillance states, whether it's bad actors getting their hands on like incredibly potent and like easy, giving them the ability to create some form of like very destructive weapon that they didn't have before. Right. To that like classic sort of Terminator style argument of like a super intelligence that just like develops its own goals that are, either don't care about the survival of humans or actively wants humans to go away. Like all of these possibilities are on the table, and it's going to be very, very hard to thread the needle between them so where we actually end up with a like awesome future, or even like an existing future, where biology is in the loop. And so there's there's so much like momentum and like forces trying to make it go even faster than it is. And so that's where I'm like, a little concerned, shall we say, about some of the tactics, for example, that Sam Altman is taking. And yeah, and then there's obviously just like, there's all these like dynamics going on between all the big players in AI as well. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm just, an observer.
Yeah, what I read was basically to revoke what he signed in executive order, revoke past government policies acting as barriers to AI innovation. So it could
Yeah.
move as fast as we want. Well, I mean, speaking of one person, we were talking about Musk's take on AI and things like that. He actually commented on you being at the final table, correct?
Hmm. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how that felt that Elon Musk said something about your final table presence there. That was a reaction into one of your posts, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's followed me on Twitter for a number of years. And obviously Eagle worked for him. So like, we know him. And he is, he loves games. He loves games. He's not particularly into poker. We've played briefly. But, it's not so much his game. But yeah, it's obviously nice to have, when anyone's supporting you and if anyone's happy for you doing well. Yeah, so that was nice.
Well, talk a bit about the involvement of study for poker since you starting back in 2005, working with Helmuth and Duke, and then seeing solvers come into use. You talked a bit about with Jeff Platt on your post-game interview there. You finished for $2.8 million at the Bahamas event. You talked about your game about being stagnant. Coming back now, you're coming back with fresh eyes. What did you think about the evolution of the study of the game from where you started to the way it is now using the solvers and the GTO and the controversies centered around that,
Yeah.
especially at the main final table, last year. So yeah.
Yeah, in the beginning, it when like solvers first came along, I was very excited by them. I was like, "Ooh, this is cool!" And it's like a new way of like sort of looking under the veil of how poker works. You could actually almost get like an intuitive grasp for the mechanics of the game. But then I don't know, it just like for me personally, after a while, it started to take the magic away because it's like it turned it more into a game of rote memorization. Now maybe I'm wrong, but for me personally, that's how it felt. Like some people feels like it added like more like creativity, and I can understand that argument too. But for me personally, I found it was just like, I loved it when the game was both math and street smarts, and it felt like it was like, no, now there's like a right answer. And if you don't if you don't memorize those right answers and you don't follow it properly, then you're not doing the game right. And there was almost like this judgment. And I felt it myself. I was like judging. I remember I got into like quite a discussion with Phil Helmuth about this. We even like co-wrote a chapter where he was like arguing for the old school, like sort of short stack plays. And I was like, no, the math is very clear. And it was almost like this like scientific smugness or like materialistic smugness or something going on. Now I look back on it and I'm like, you know what, Phil, you were right. like you can still do. Yes, the math says, the GTO says you should, do this with 18 big blinds in this spot. But like, you're now being predictable. That's actually a form of predictability. And yes, I know GTO solutions have like randomizer built in, etc. But B, you're like, if you get too entrenched in that mindset, then you miss out on this extra layer of information, and which I think is actually very underappreciated, which is the live reads or like the other, like the meta stuff. Just like, what is the psychology of the person? And like humans, even the best players, even the most robotic players still have tells. That's what I had like forgotten. And I think my strength back in the day was this ability to just like get lost in the vibe. And like the sort of the social dynamics that is going on of a game and like the evolution of the game. That's what I used to love and be good at. Wow. That was like my edge. And then I kind of like shut that part of my brain off or something because it was like, no, it's all about the math now. It's all about the, just work with the solvers. And I think that's partially where I lost my love for the game. And then but now, with this like 5 years away, and what that enabled me to do was to kind of let my ego get over itself a little bit, because I've become so wrapped up in this notion of being like Liv, the good pro, who's like, she's a science nerd and so she's good at like solvers and all this stuff. When actually I'm not that good at that stuff at all. That was never my strength. Being particularly GTO-y. And I had to let that like identity die. And the idea of like that I'm a good pro, like the identity of being a pro die. Like I could come back in and I'm like, no, I'm a fish now. I'm an amateur and I'm going to do fishy stuff and I'm going to try stuff out. And that's what it needed. That's what I really needed. Like I don't think I would have had the balls to pull off that, the hand with against disease. Even though technically my call was, I lost, my read was right.
Right.
And I would never have had the balls to like do stuff like that before. And but it was those kind of plays that like actually made me feel alive and have a fun time. And so, having that 5-year break was just enabled me to like come back with fresh eyes without like a big attachment to being a good player. Like even when you said, it was funny, like when you said you're like, oh, we're going to talk through this hand, I got like nervous. I was like,
I saw that.
Oh no, I need to think about how to like, what were my ranges here? What would Smart Live say? And I was like, no, I'm going to say the truth, which was I had a read, I saw read the dude, and I was right. And like that was the extent of really my thinking.
Right.
So it was like, it's interesting sort of feeling that old personality. It's still there, like, oh, respect me as a good pro, but it's just like, no. I'm embracing the fish, and I want to be it, and it's just way more fun.
Yeah, it looks like you had a blast at the final table.
Oh, it was the best. I mean, on the actual FT, I was card dead as anything, but I was just like, all right, I'm like, I don't have many decisions to make. I'm just going to sit here and print money while they all knock each other out.
You had so much fun, and we all enjoyed watching you, rooting for you. It's good to see you again at the tables. What was the most fun of being at that table for you? Just competing again? Because you're a very competitive person. We talked a bit about that in our interview back, 14 years ago. So what's your what did you enjoy the most about the table?
I mean, probably most of all, just like being just the like intensity of the experience, just like being like, wow. I was able this time, like if I compare this back to like the other like major win I had, which was the UPT back in 2010.
Right.
Like I was so like hungry and desperate for that win. I couldn't really enjoy it that much because it was just like, it would mattered so much to me that I won it. Obviously my financial situation was very different back then. No one knew who I was. I needed to be like respected. I wanted to like make a name for myself, and I wanted, and so I didn't get to sort of like, I didn't have that. I couldn't step back and just like observe the experience for what it was. Whereas this time around, I'm 40 now. I probably like just learned a bit of more mindfulness or whatever. And because it like, as I said, like my identity wasn't wrapped up in being a pro. I could actually just like take I have moments of just being like, holy shit, what is happening? Like I never thought I would be in this situation again. This is so cool. So I got to actually just like have those little moments of reflection and gratitude throughout the experience. And I think that's probably why I was just having so much fun. But then, what else? Just like the glamour of it all. Like, the set they had built was just so beautiful.
Gorgeous set, yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. And just it was so smoothly run. And also like tons of my friends were still in, like Musta was still in, Sorrel was still in. Like it was, it was so nice. Just like, it was like old times again, but with the added bonus of being on the biggest poker stage imaginable. My silly ass was somehow there. I don't know. It was just such a good time.
No, also talk a bit about, because when we talked in 2010, 2011, the position of women in the game as far as women in the game, as far as the notoriety of some of the amazing women, especially over the last couple of years, rising and just crushing the game. How have you experienced the evolution of women in poker at the table and all of that, and dealing with men's egos and all that's involved with that over the last 15 years? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, things have definitely, if I like look back at sort of like the early days when I was, like 2008, 2009, it was definitely like women were seen purely as like a sex symbol marketing thing for they were like a token marketing thing. Yeah. And obviously I leaned into that like a ton, because it was, I would never have got my Stars deal had I not been a young girl, and all the attention I got. So like, I'm well aware of how much that has helped me. But yeah, they were just like, they'd be more like, everyone was just like, it was like par for the course to objectify women. Like, it was just completely standard. Like, they're all the poker media, there'd be like rankings of who's the hottest female, it would be ranked by our looks as opposed to our winnings, or like any cool plays we made or any smart stuff we said. Don't get me wrong, there were still organizations that would try to do that, but that was just much more the default. And then I don't know, people have just like realized that that's actually, A, women ultimately don't want that, and B, it's not good. It's not a good look for the game.
For sure.
And if you do truly want to get more women in the game, then there's some kind of explosion happening. Do you see that?
Did you set off fireworks in your apartment?
I didn't. This for some reason this happens to me on every like Zoom calls. There's like balloons and shit. I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
And
Clearly, you programmed that into your AI.
I didn't. I don't know. It just loves doing it. It's just
what is good timing on that? Women in the game, fireworks. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the AI likes it, so that's good. But yeah, so. That said, it does feel like if we think about sort of, again, the evolution of the game through like the more, and I say this in the very like zoomed out view of like masculine and feminine energies, the intuitive style of playing is a very feminine energy. Yep. The like caring of like I was talking about, the social dynamics in the table, like the reads, all that meta information that's going on.
Very yin.
Exactly. And then like the solvers and the math and the very like scientific side of the game is much more yang. It's more masculine. And perhaps that's why, looking back on it, like I was like, in order to sort of like fit into that style of play, I was having to shut down my feminine energy. And like, that's probably why I wasn't having so much fun. And, I hope that now that the game has almost sort of gone full circle, it's like it's now truly a combination of both. People are starting waking back up to actually all this. Yes, we've got the game theory and this is very real and it's not going anywhere, and you need that, but you can also work on honing on your like feminine skills, the reads, the social stuff. If you want to be the best poker player, you do both.
Yeah. And
actually, like talking about Phil Hellmuth or a lot of the greats, Negreanu, they have both.
Yep.
Maybe not in their presentation style, but like their style of play, they do both really well. And these like long running greats, and a lot of the new players too. Jungle Man does both. A lot of the players do.
Chance Corneth, Alex Foxen, they both do both.
Yeah, absolutely. Chrissy Foxen, like it's this blend of both. And so yeah, I don't know. I was always, I think part of the problem as well, I was always a little skeptical of the feminine side of it. Because that was my own sort of pathology of like believing, it was almost like my own internalized misogyny of like, no, like the masculine way is the right way. And I would never, even though I knew it was like, I was meant to say to women, yes, you're going to be really good at this because you've got all these reads and the women's intuition. I didn't fully believe it. And now I do, because I've just had since I've actually just been leaning into like the witchy, intuitive stuff, my life is A, so much more fun. B, I'm so much more successful. Like my world has opened up in incredible ways, and like the work I'm doing is so meaningful when I use that stuff. Right. And so now I can fully say, like believing it to my core, that actually, yes, women lean into that stuff, and men, whoever, but lean into the the energy, the vibe stuff. It's real, it's potent, and that's where the real magic lies.
Where in life do you think you began, because of obviously it's a male-dominated business world and so on? Where in life do you think you learned to have to shut down that intuition? It was in school that you had to achieve, because you're a very competitive person.
Yeah. I mean, I went to an all-girls school.
Okay.
That was very encouraging of us to be whatever we wanted to be. So it wasn't that. Mm-hmm. I really don't think so. I think it was just like something in almost like inside of, I don't know. I don't know. I'd always had this like I've always been like kind of like more classically masculine brained compared to most women, which is probably why I was so interested in like physics and poker, which is still ultimately on the spectrum of all things in the world, poker is very, very masculine coded, and it always will be. And I think that's why you'll never see a parity of men and women wanting to play it, because it's just like it's about risk. It's about like cutthroaty. It's kind of psychopathic if you think about it. You're like playing this, like my win is literally taking money off the table of someone else's. Those are like typically male interested traits. So it doesn't mean it's bad. It just is what it is. But yeah, I don't really know where like I've had that like that real like masculine approach to success. But it's true that like a lot of our society just that is how stuff runs.
Right.
If you want to rise the ranks in anything, you need to have a like drive to do so, and that is a masculine-ish trait.
Right.
And that's what and I think if I had to, yes, there's been a sort of in some ways almost like the toxic manifestation of the feminine, which was like the wokest stuff, which is going way too far, and becomes like damaging, but it was in a very a response to the fact that like society has historically been incredibly male dominated. The masculine just dominates everything. I mean, just look at the way women have been treated over the or like just the weaker people in general. Through history they've not done well. So yeah, I don't know. It's just my own little evolution, I guess.
Well, what about the evolution? Have you been influenced? You've done many. Look at your list of podcasts you've done for your Win-Win podcast. We'll definitely talk a bit about that. So, do you have any key moments, enlightening moments that your intuition began to awaken in your real life that transferred over to everything else? Because the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Is some philosophy that I have. So, is there some awakenings you had along the way over the last 15 years to say that made you trust this intuition more, or maybe personal work you've done or somebody you interviewed that really impressed you?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, one particular person who just really, jolted me for the first time was Daniel Schmachtenberger, who was actually the very first person I interviewed for Win-Win. He was technically episode 0. I hadn't called it Win-Win at this point. I just knew I wanted to start interviewing people. Yeah. Technically, Molly Bloom was episode 1, but the Schmachtenberger is probably it's the most important one I would recommend anyone listen to just sort of understand. I think he's pretty much the smartest person alive right now, or at least the most like holistic thinker alive, or at least that I've met. I remember in 2018 also when I first ever met him, and we were talking because he's like very involved in sort of catastrophic risk mitigation. And he looked at me and he was like, "You need to get in touch with your feminine side."
Wow.
And I was like, I hate it. I was like, who is this guy? And what? I remember being like, ugh, who are you to say this to me? And what does that even mean? I had no idea what it meant. And I was like, ugh. And then for the next 6 months, a series of very strange things proceeded to happen. One of which, I've told the story before, so I don't mind sharing it again here, was I started developing like an inner ear problem where, strangely enough, it was actually at the World Series of 2018, it started really manifesting. Men's voices I couldn't listen to. Like just in my right ear, any man's voice, except for Igor's, interestingly, would become incredibly distorted and like horrible. And it was really rough. I like had to sort of stop playing because I just couldn't do anything social because it was just like, it was very, very uncomfortable. And then also like I would just sort of have some like deafness that came with it and like this weird muffling sound. And I went to various doctors and they were like, oh, we don't know what it is really. You've lost a bit of your like low frequency hearing. You might have this thing called Meniere's disease, which is basically where the nerve cells in the inner ear die and it's like irreversible and you eventually end up deaf. And you'll also get these terrible like dizzy spells and so on. So it's a horrible disease and there's no known cure. And I was like, well, that sucks. Really bad news. And I would proceed to like sort of keep getting these attacks of like this like distortion and deafness. And then I was at Burning Man a few months later, and I have for the first time one of the like dizzy spells as well, where I'm like got nausea and vomiting, and it was just like real low moment. And on the last night of Burning Man, I get talking to this girl, and I mentioned because I'm like sad, and she's like, "What's the matter?" I'm like, "Well, I've got this problem, and I don't know what to do." And she's like, and she was this very like like as like feminine, witchy, sensitive type person as you can imagine. Like she's like the walking example of this. And she's like, "Well, I do energy healing. Would you like me to take a look?"
Wow.
And I was so skeptical of that stuff. I was just like, this is actual, this is nonsense. But at this point, I was so desperate. I was like, whatever. Yeah, I'm a Burning Man. If not now, then whenever. Like, sure, have a go. Long story short, she's like sort of puts her hand over my ear, and then she's like, "Oh, there's something there." And she leans in with her mouth and starts like doing this like weird like sucking thing over my ear, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. I was like, "Please stop, please stop." She's like, "There's something there. I need to get it." And then about, I don't know, after a couple of minutes, she collapses on the ground, crying, shaking. It was a warm night. She was shaking, going, "Oh my God, what was that? What was that?" And she was terrified. Like she had like had something bad pass through her. And now I'm terrified because I'm like, what's going on? Like I was happy, we're having a nice time, and now it's like the energy's really like shifted. And she after a while she sort of comes around and she's like, "I don't really know, like that was very intense. Whatever it was, it's gone. You're and I was like, "Well, but what about my hearing?" And she's like, "I don't know, you'll have physical symptoms for another couple of weeks and then you'll probably be fine." And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
Like literal, as far as I'm concerned, like as close to a miraculous healing as I could imagine. So like there are many explanations for this, and I've heard everything ranging from you had a demon sucked out of your ear to like, this is the power of the placebo effect. I don't know which one I subscribe to. I think there's like elements of truth in all of it. She's like, I've spoken to her afterwards, and she did some sort of, because she was new to energy healing, I should caveat.
Oh, okay.
And she was like, "Oh, it turns out she's like, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I did it a little wrong, and I let, you had this like negative energy, that everybody has."
And she took it on.
She took it on in like too much, basically. She let it like go into her fully when she's just meant to let it pass through and be released about where it wants to go. She's like, it wasn't bad per se. It wasn't like, it wasn't evil. It was just like stuck energy that you needed clearing. And anyway, and she, helped me do it. But the thing is that looking back on it, I think I needed as an experience as extreme and as scary as that to like rattle my cage enough to be like, oh shit, there's like modalities here and there's other forms of healing. There's more going on than like conventional physics tells us.
100%. You've never done, what's your background in meditation? And I'm trained in Kundalini yoga, certified there 20, 30 years ago. So as far as understanding the energy centers of the body and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of opposite of what you've studied in college. So tell me a bit about your experiences there. Do you meditate, or do you done any kind of energy work, inner work like that, working with your own centers and things?
Well, now I have.
Okay.
But that was the first time, basically. I mean, I'd done like a little bit of meditation here and there. And, if I think back to when I was a kid, I was actually like a bit more into like that stuff, just because I was like always around animals, and it was actually a very like intuitive way of living. But I hadn't done it for the longest, basically none. And as I said, I'd become like, like the classic, like 100% physicalist, materialist, rationalist, scientist, like that mindset, which I think is a very important mindset, and like body of work.
Yes.
I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. That stuff is still valid and true and very important, and most people need a lot of training in that. But if it's taken, again, it's like if you become a maximalist, an extremist in that, and have that define your entire worldview, then you're missing out on all the other stuff, which is also useful. And like, yeah.
It would be interesting. You've done that work now, and then you've jumped back into poker, and look what you've done. So as far as the way you're at the table is more fun, you say, hey, I can dock bet here. I'm not supposed to as a pro, but I can dock bet and do some things you normally wouldn't have done. I love that conversation you did with Jeff. You can do more. You talked about more feel plays, and maybe the GTO air has progressed or gone to the other polarity a little bit to have some sort of balance, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it just seems like, and I mean, I could be just like over applying this theory here, but I don't know. It just seems like now there's been so many, there are so many different possible like GTO solutions you can have that it's plausible that you can, donk. Before it was like donk betting was never a thing. Like everyone just like looked down on it, and it turns out that actually certain mixed strategies should have a certain frequency of donk betting, or some of the short stack plays where it was like this idea of, you can't commit half your stack and then fold pre-flop or whatever, or doing the cool thing that people do on like sub 10 big blinds, you'll actually defend and then front jam. Those aren't outside the realms of math. They're actually quite reasonable. But I don't know. Like all the things that we used to laugh at the fish for doing, it felt like in the sort of 2010 to 2013 era, there was like this almost like snobbery of like, oh, look what they did now.
I know.
Turns out actually there's usually some like you can justify it mathematically as well, or like at least a lot of it. So that's why it's just, I don't know, like just do what you want, do as you feel.
Well, that's one of the things that I, looking up at some of your work you've done recently, you've talked a bit, and we didn't have that in 2010 or 2005 as much as we do now in any shape or form, social media. So you talked about the evolution of social media and how do we fix social media in one of your recent podcasts, and about the mental health and about the news driving us crazy. I'm curious, what has been your take on, because obviously you're heavily involved in social media. Win-Win Podcast is a very popular podcast and very interesting topics. What's your take on the evolution of it in society, and also the way poker is using it with all these content creators, which we didn't have in 2010?
Yeah. I think the way poker is using it is great, actually.
It's fun.
I think it's really cool. There's so much like weird creative stuff. I just saw the other day on Instagram, I don't even know who it was. I've never seen her before, but it was like a girl and a guy like acting out a skit where it's like how poker sounds to non-poker players, and it's like, oh, I fish bet the 3-bet donk ball. They're just like,
there was Nikki Limo.
It's so good. I was like, this is just real quality comedy art. Like, I love that there's this kind of content being created, and I love that like that's obviously like one of the biggest blessings of social media is that it's like it's democratized the ability to make media. Before it was so expensive. You needed an expensive camera, or you needed like fancy editing equipment. And now, so many more people who have lots of ideas but don't necessarily have the means can like make cool stuff. And that's obviously one of the big blessings of it. It can also be used to like raise awareness of issues that have been under the radar. There's so much good that can come with it, but at the same time, there are these like really dangerous, malevolent forces, which are again coming back to this idea of like Moloch and misaligned game theory, particularly around like addiction, right? Like I personally have a real bad social media addiction when it comes to like Twitter and so on. I just like I can feel it, like my phone trying to. It's like this force trying to get my attention. In the morning when I have a quiet moment, it's like, ooh, what's happening here? And I know I'm not alone with that. Like so many people. And some of the and like some social media companies are worse than others, but ultimately all of them are trapped in the game of like who can get the most addicted users, who can get the most eyeballs. And they're using increasingly ruthless and frankly immoral methods to get people addicted to their algorithms.
Right. So
that they just, because that's, they're on a pay-per impression model. They're on an advertiser revenue model. So they're directly incentivized to try and like maximize user minutes, like eyeball minutes on it. And one of the reasons I've been like so particularly outspoken about TikTok is because they not only use some of the most ruthless methods, although frankly, Instagram and a lot of the others are catching up. Like they use like intermittent reinforcement. They artificially make new users go viral quite frequently, which is like literal classic slot machine methods. But then on top of that, they target almost into, their main target audience is younger people, like Gen Z, teenagers, even children. Like the vast majority of their users are like under 25. And those are people who have even less ability to like they don't even know what the world was like before.
Discernment.
So
Yeah.
they have less discernment. They have less, it. Their brains aren't. There's evidence that the brains aren't even fully developed until the age of 25, right? And they're just like ruthlessly targeting and like getting people completely addicted, so that their entire like social lives and even their like economic lives are now tied in, because like a lot of them are making money from it. Which again, that's good that people can make money. Like I like that, but if you're using such ruthless methods of addicting people where they can't even like, you've seen like you give a kid an iPad or like their phone and then you take it away, they're acting like you just like you're skinning them alive. That's not healthy and that's not sustainable. So like I think one plausible method that, like, if I was if I was in charge of government, I would probably do is that all social media companies that want to operate in a country, we should have to publicly, their algorithms should be public, so that people can see what methods are being used to addict people, what are the kind of like average user length stats, that kind of stuff. And then also the other thing, which is these are things that are increasingly becoming like mind control devices, like mass hypnosis techniques, where you can steer political opinion through algorithms. And that's another reason why I think, TikTok in particular is so malevolent, because it is known to be like, it's controlled by a hostile foreign power. And I don't think it's not good for anyone to be able to politically influence vast swathes of people. But like, if we're going to like have that, at least let it be in-house, and so like if algorithms were made publicly scrutinizable, then like including the knobs that are, the people who get to like twist the knobs, like if we have some transparency there, then at least we can know what's going on. And then, hey, if it turns out they're innocent, they're not doing anything, that's also good. Right. So the fact that they like are being like trying to avoid having any kind of transparency should be a huge red flag.
Where do you fall with, it was proven that the administration before was trying to curb free speech and trying to tell the social media channels not to post something from during the COVID time.
Oh, yeah.
Harvard doctors, all that BS going on, and shutting them down, saying Twitter, don't do that. And then evolving into Musk taking over Twitter. And how do you think, I'm combining a couple of questions here, because obviously he influenced the election somewhat too. Obviously, it was a very heavily, he was heavily wanted one person to win. So what did you think about that in regard to the use of X and even TikTok, being shut down and then opened right back up when the new administration came in, all the involvement of all that? Where do you fall in that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely, things about the new form of Twitter that I don't like, in that, there happen to be more, because I would say, like, if I had to, it's very difficult. I'm really just like a giant centrist in terms of like, there are some things I'm very left on, there's some things I'm very right on, some things I'm very like, I'm just like a mess of political views, frankly. But, definitely I now see more perspectives that I don't like, because I don't like the far right stuff. And you see a lot more of that now, because that was literally, but what people don't realize is how bad the censorship was before.
Yeah.
And how it was literally a propaganda mouthpiece for the, like, I use the word Democrat, but it was like this kind of, wasn't even, it was like this establishment leftist media, like it was really strange. But like they were shut down. Like you couldn't even, Facebook made it, you couldn't even talk about the possibility that it was a lab leak in COVID, which, whatever your viewpoints is, it's far from settled. Like my money is, I'm like 80% confident it was a lab leak, for various reasons. But like the fact that you couldn't even discuss it is just
ridiculous.
1984 level stuff. Or like vaccine, like the fact that they, I'm still pro-vaccine, but I was very anti-mandate, because these things were like brand new science. I have someone very, very close to me who was healthy and fit and literally had a very, very bad vaccine injury.
Same thing.
And yet they weren't the lowest risk demographic from COVID. And so it was just like, wait, you can't force something, as soon as it was shown that the vaccines didn't actually really stop transmission, there was absolutely no moral argument for mandating it. and yet they still did it anyway. And then they like persecuted anyone who like dared speak out against it. And that was even more terrifying. So while I don't like seeing, as much anti-Semitism and right-wing stuff, as you see, I would still take that over the prior thing, which I think was much more insidious and dark.
Yeah. No,
But again, that's why I think like proper transparency, like these algorithms should be so open sourced and as transparent as possible on all platforms. Then you reduce the risk of like make it harder to do political like tweaking, and you make it harder. People are better armed to understand what like addiction methods are being used against them. It's not a perfect solution, but I think it's a fairly obvious no-brainer. It's like definitely like a Pareto improvement or something.
Right. Let's talk a bit about your recent post. For the longest time, when I started doing meditation, that kind of work like 30, 35 years ago in my early 20s, it opened up a whole different world to me. Like you said, paying attention to the intuitive. I've seen some amazing things, work with energy, yours like you have, and saw some quackery and also saw some amazing things I thought I'd never see before. The evolution, the point is, doing meditation, I felt a more sensitivity to people and I've always been a big animal lover, animals all my life. You posted something recently about caged pigs, that we would react, in like an outrageous manner if people saw cats and dogs being in little tiny cages and transported across the country. They're
not even being transported. This is how they live.
That's how they live, and I've seen posts that.
Yeah, they're called gestation crates, and the female pigs are literally put them in, as soon as they're of breeding age, they are put into this crate that is it's not even really long enough for it. Their snouts are pressed against the front, and their butts are against the back. And they're so narrow that they can't even turn their heads properly. And if you did that to a dog for even a few hours, people would flip out. Like, if a dog... And yet they literally live their lives like this. Imagine never being able to even turn around or take a step forward or backwards. And that's your entire life. And this is an intelligent animal, smarter than a dog.
Yep.
It's wild. And this is it's been happening at a mass scale for a long time. But what's just this new Trump appointee for the Department of Agriculture, who's like very clearly just in the pocket of big pork, because that's the thing. The small farms aren't the ones really doing stuff like this. They actually take good care of their animals, like help pasture raised, free range. It's these huge industrial outfits that she's pretty clearly in the pocket of. That's how they get to sell the cheapest meat, because if you just restrict the animals' movements and they're like less, it's just less energy usage, et cetera, et cetera. The market forces incentivize these big companies to literally treat their animals as badly as possible that they can get away with, such that they don't just drop dead. Yeah. Those are the incentives. It's so screwed up. And this new appointee is now trying to make it so previously states could vote. They could make at their discretion vote whether they wanted caged meat to be sold. And for example, the state of California voted, no, we don't want this. We just don't want that kind of meat. It's obviously bad for the animals. It's horrible for human health. Like, these animals are like miserable and stressed,
terrified,
full of cortisol at all times. Like, they're not moving. Like again, if we're going to talk about energy, the energy there is bad, and you're consuming like tortured, heavy, like dark energy meat.
Energy for sure.
But also on the science realm, they're pumped full of antibiotics, because that's the only way to keep them alive under these conditions, which is creating terrible antibiotic resistance and all these novel pathogens. Plus, there's also risk of just like when you keep so many animals in such a like dense, shit covered environment, novel viruses can emerge, so it can create a new pandemic. So it's just bad across the board. The only people who benefit are a small number of these very already rich industrial farms. They get a little bit of a higher profit margin. So again, talk about like people who maximize shareholder value. That's a classic example of this deep misalignment. And anyway, so this new Trump appointee is trying to make it law that states are forced to take this tortured meat. They're forced to sell it in their stores. And it's just like, it's like taking like moral step backwards, akin to like it's not as bad as like it's like taking a step backwards. It's like you've repealed slavery and now we want to unrepeal it. It's like why are we doing this? Not that I want to make the comparison. Obviously, slavery is much worse, but like it's just like it's so unnecessary. And she's like dressing it up as I'm doing it to help the local American farms, and it's like no, like you're obviously not. There's not even little local farmers don't tend to do this stuff. So it's just classic like bullshit lobbying stuff.
So yeah, I saw Daniel responded to it. Obviously, he's been a vegetarian and vegan. I think vegetarian. I'm not sure if he's a vegan at the moment for a long time. What's your? I saw some of the podcasts you do with Igor is very funny. Being one of the worst things he's seen in poker is you folding pocket tens to a 3-bet.
Oh yeah. No, I definitely misplayed that hand hard. That's one where the pure vibes. Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
That was a little too much deviating from the GTO. I think the standard reasonable thing would just have been rejammed, but I miscounted my stack and I thought I had more than I did, so I thought I could. It was a 3-bet call, and then I 3-bet, and then suddenly the vibes fell off, and I was like, "Oh, I feel like I'm not going to win this," and I folded. And I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe I would have lost to the ace-8 suited, but either way, it was a very bad play.
What have you learned from doing all these amazing guests besides your first podcast? I was curious about some of your favorite ones you've done, but as far as you and Igor have always had an amazing relationship from what we can see from the public point of view, and a great sense of humor between the two of you. And I've worked with him a few times over the years too. What have you learned about relationships, especially relationships with a poker player, over doing these podcasts and living with another amazing player over these last number of years? What have you learned the most about how to make a relationship strong, loving, respectful, and supportive? And just share a little bit about that, because it's fascinating.
Well, I mean, for us personally, a huge bedrock of our relationship is our ability and our love for smack talk.
Yeah, I love that.
We're both very competitive. We both obviously love games. Sometimes when we need to blow off steam, we'll just like find some kind of thing we can be competitive on. Whether as we go even bouldering, climbing, even though that's technically not a competitive thing, we'll be like, I'm going to do this really better than you, or like, I'm going to do it first time. Because we're such competitive people, we need to find an outlet for it. And so, yeah, luckily we're both very aligned in that regard. And then, yeah, I guess in terms of what maybe is unique, or at least sort of we're an outlier in compared to other relationships, is just we're so like radically honest and transparent, and we just don't let stuff bottle up, or like very little, to the point where we will, for people who maybe observe us, are like, oh wow, these guys fight a lot, they argue, they're often bickering, and they're kind of a little bit mean to each other, but it's just simply because we're both like quite strong personalities, but we just have no filter. If he's annoying me, like he knows about it immediately, and vice versa. And we're just, because we just immediately vent, nothing ever builds up, and we never actually then have, like a lot of couples are either like complete like a sort of 1 or 0 out of 10 in terms of like, they're so nice, they're just nice, but then like these little things build up, and then eventually it blows up in this huge like 10 out of 10 fight. Whereas we're just like constantly in the 2, 3, 4 zone, but we never get above a 6. It just doesn't happen. So yeah, and then because we've like cultivated this like radical transparency thing, we just don't really have any secrets from each other. It's we find ways to surprise one another by just being weird, but like it's not like if you start having secrets of some kind that aren't like opt-in, it's okay to have secrets if you both want to do that, like fine, but that's when then you start sort of living separate worlds too much, and that's where I think then relationships tend to go south.
So I know we got to wrap up soon with you. You have other things going on today, as do I. A couple quick things for people tuning into the Win-Win podcast. talk a bit about you mentioned that you're going beyond the podcast. You mentioned that your interview with Jeff Platt, a couple of your favorite interviews you've done there, and what you're looking forward to with that project.
Yeah, favorite interviews. What do I think people would the Molly Bloom one is amazing. It was, again, the first one. I mean, it's poker related. And she just, we talk about like psychopathy and her experience of, when healthy, again, like healthy competitive poker players and really unhealthy ones, and like the dark side of it, which obviously she's seen a lot of. The Simon Sinek one is amazing, where he talks about like the kind of this misalignment within companies. He's like a sort of, I don't know how to describe Simon. He's just like a public intellectual who specializes in like personal growth, and he does a lot of coaching of like really, really big CEOs of huge companies. That one's really good. Actually, one that maybe many people haven't seen, but I think they would really enjoy is Marcus Daniel, who is a pro tennis player.
Okay.
He won bronze in the Olympics, not this time around, the time before. And he's just really smart. And we talk a lot about the like similarities and differences between like the pressures on pro tennis players and the pressures on pro poker players. I'd recommend people check that one out. It's really cool. But yeah, and then I don't know, whatever you're interested. The Botez sisters, if people are, like Alex is obviously, she's really into poker now. They're just so brilliant and funny. That one came out recently, where we sort of talk about some of them are more like social media type. What's it like being an influencer? Also, like just like what's it like being a woman in games? If anyone's interested in that, that's a really good episode. Yeah.
So, what is the future for poker with you? You said you were going to. You said Jeff asked you, "We're going to see more of you." You said, "No, probably not." You're going to pursue your goal of making the world a better place. And can you share more about what people see you? With mainly just the main event, or a couple events a year? And
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I can feel like poker. She's like a siren singing to me, like, come back and play more. And like, I was literally in Vegas this week giving a talk. And then there was like some tournament going on in the Poker Go studio. And he was like, well, I'm going to go play it. And then I finished my talk. I was like, well, fine. So I went and played. And then I was at the table with Phil Hellmuth, Alex Foxen, Jeremy Ausmus, Patrick Leonard. And they were all like trying to set a line on how many tournaments I'm going to play. And like clearly they're like, yeah, see you tomorrow, Liv. You're going to be back playing the next one. So I don't know. I need to try and stick to my guns, and I think 10 is a really good line of how many tournaments I'll play this year. But really, I'm just a glory chaser. I just want, I would like to win a bracelet by myself, because I've only got one with me and Igor. Duel. I'd love to win a WPT and get the Triple Crown. But I'm not chasing it. That's really the thing. Like if I play poker, it really has to be in service of this whole like win-win concept. Yeah. Which, obviously the World Series score was very much because I pre-pledged 20% to. I
meant to ask about that.
Yeah.
About the charity work you've done. Yeah.
Well, right. So, I mean, we kind of talked about it with this factory farming thing, right? It's the reason why it's such an issue, like so front of mind for me, is because that was what had motivated me before playing in Bahamas to do. I was like, you know what? Whatever I cash in this tournament, I'm going to donate 20% to improving the lives of factory farmed animals. And then I go and win 2.8 million, which is 560K to these causes. So, yeah, like that. Talk about like manifesting a win-win. That's, poker is technically as zero sum as it gets. And yet if with the right, there's always externalities, there's always downstream effects. And so to me, that was a lesson in like create the right incentives and the right sort of game design to help the thing that you want. And who knows, maybe I'm being wooey now, but it felt like it was kind of, here you go. Yes. This issue matters to you, and this issue matters to the world. Because like the deck was really on my side. I know that's always the case when you go deep in a big tournament. But man, it felt like the cards wanted me to get there, and so I was trying to ride that wave. But so I'm definitely going to try and like test out this like concept more, and just like I'll play when I'm feeling like this is a good win-win moment. Let's see what we can, I like making money too. I want to get rich too. So I'm going to try and be selective and only do it when it's in service of that.
Well, it's good to see you again. Thank you, Liv, for joining us here on.
Thank you, Craig. This is super fun. Really, really good questions.
Lots of fun. Yeah, I've enjoyed. I wondered where you went, and we just had such a good time together over the years. Tell Igor hi.
I will.
He's such a gentleman in working with.
Maybe I don't know. I mean, if he might be up for doing one as well. He's got a lot of thoughts he wants to get out these days. I just love what you guys are doing with PokerOrg, and
Thank you.
It's really, it's like, it's just taking poker to a deeper level.
No, I'm very blessed to work with some amazing people, with Eric Holreiser starting PokerOrg and being about the players and the issues. So we're pretty proud of what we've done so far. So let's see where it goes, Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to see you.